I was 19, and it was a few days after Christmas. I was packing my suitcase, and inside that suitcase was perfectly coordinated business clothes for an internship in Washington, D.C. I was folding an Express shirt, meticulously going over my plan. I would sit Mom and Dad down. I would tell them that I loved them. I would tell them that nothing has changed. And then I would rip off the Band-Aid, and I would say the words, "I am gay." 10 minutes would pass. They would either be screaming or crying, and my car would finally arrive. I would jump in it, and we would be off to the airport, and I would be on the plane to DC. I knew they likely wouldn't accept me, but at least I would be free. 5 minutes later, my mom came home from work, and from the other side of the house, I hear a gut-wrenching scream followed by tears, and I had no idea what was going on. It was terrifying, so I ran across, and I found my mother on top of my sister performing CPR. My sister had committed suicide. And in that moment, my plan had changed. Hell, my whole life had changed. And in 24 hours, I would become the only child in a first-generation immigrant household. And it became real when my dad handed me paperwork that indicated that I was the new power of attorney and the checkbook and asked me to execute her funeral. In that moment, our child-to-parent relationship had reversed. It was pretty terrible. Well, I did find my way onto that plane to DC a few weeks later. And that first internship would turn into a job, and that job would turn into grad school, and grad school would turn into another job. And the whole time, I would still be in the closet. For months and almost years, I would be my parents' only support system and resource as they struggled through their grief and through understanding mental health, which in our culture was particularly taboo to talk about. I would be their shoulder to cry on and their coach throughout their grief. All the while, my parents would never get to see the amazing gay man that I was becoming. 10 years later, on a warm summer afternoon, my dad and mom called, and Dad was particularly excited. You see, my dad had just negotiated a really good proposal. And when I say proposal, in our family, my dad is the marriage broker for arranged marriages. In fact, he had negotiated the arranged marriages for the majority of my first cousins. And it was a father-son bonding activity when we would review the deal. I remember my dad super excited, and he said, "Melvin, we have a very good deal. And Kuta, this is the best deal there is." "All right, Dad, tell me about it." "Kuta, she is 27, fair-skinned, God-fearing. She is skinny. She is US educated and a pharmacist. Her father is willing to pay for the entire wedding and the down payment of the house." "Damn, Dad, that's a lot of money. Who's this lucky bastard?" "Ha ha ha, Kota, this is my best deal, and this deal is for you. Would you like to see her photo?" Oh my Ganesh. My hands were shaking, and I almost dropped the phone right then. I felt like I was being backed into a corner, and the emotions were swirling throughout my body. First came fear. Would they cut me off right now? 2, would we be able to survive another family crisis? And then anger. How the fuck did they not know? I mean, I was sprinkling hints throughout the entire course of my life. Like when I was 5 and I was on the playground strutting in my sister's pink jumpsuit. I felt pretty fabulous then. Or when I was 10 and I was slaying at regional dance competitions. Or when I was 15 as a sensitive soul and I would watch Oprah and she would teach me to connect with my inner self. Or when I was 20 and I came back from college 15 pounds lighter in skinny jeans and with frosted tips. Or hell, now at 29, when I had never dated anyone, much less a girl. How the fuck did they not know? Kuta, this is a great deal. Are you interested? 10 years had finally caught up with me, and I had to execute the plan. I had to rip off the Band-Aid. I had to say the words. But unlike when I was 19, I wasn't as prepared. So what came out was honesty. Does she have a brother? Silence. And then we all hung up. For the next week, I would go through all of the emotions, from joy to fear. And then it hit me. I had been preparing for this moment for years. But to my immigrant parents, this was new. This was scary. This was uncharted territory for them. And they were all alone all over again. Unlike other people, my parents didn't have a support network because to be gay in our culture was especially taboo. So I realized that the only way we were going to get through this was through it together. And I picked up the phone and I called. Hundreds of awkward conversations and interesting questions about sexuality. Things started to get a little bit better. And 2 years later, my dad wanted to come visit DC. And I was ready to finally share with him the world that I had created and for him to meet my boyfriend. So I devised a plan. They would meet in a very public space, have a semi-private conversation when I was away, and there would be plenty of escape paths just in case it got awkward. So they met at a kickball game on the National Mall. They would chat when I was up at bat, and they could run away if they wanted to. It was the mall. So the moment had finally come, and the week before, I made sure to coach my dad through this conversation. I called him and I introduced Dustin in the way that he knew best. Dad, Dustin is 27 years old. He's fair-skinned, skinny, tall, a med student at Johns Hopkins University. And he's going to be excited to talk to you. I'm not sure if he's God-fearing, but who cares about that? I also coached Dustin. I told him that my dad would be curious, but maybe a little uncomfortable, that he should be engaging, but he should let my dad drive the conversation. I knew Dustin was going to be great. He was great with all parents. And after I introduced my dad to my teammates, I introduced my dad to Dustin. And now it was my time to go to bat. As I walked away, I heard my dad say, "Dustin, it is very nice to meet you." At bat, I was super nervous for 2 reasons. 1, the conversation behind me, I needed that to go well. And 2, bases were loaded and I had to kick a line drive. I knew my dad had a few different escape routes in this conversation, and I knew a lot of that dealt with my ability to play kickball. I remember telling him, if it gets terrible and awkward, just look at him and say, "Dustin, let's watch Melvin play kickball. He was terrible at sports as a child. Maybe he'll be better now." I surprisingly kicked the ball perfectly. And as I'm heading to first base, I notice that they're still talking to each other. Perfect. And as I pause at second, I look over and they're still talking, and they're not even looking at me. I had just gotten to second base. When I slid into third, I knew they would be looking. False. They were still chatting. My dad's hands were crossed, so I didn't know how it was going. But I could have swore I heard them laughing. When I finally crossed home plate, I high-fived my teammates, grabbed water, and walked up to Dad and Dustin. They were politely ending their conversation, and Dustin looked at me and smiled. That was our predetermined cue if the conversation went well. I was nervous, but we had dinner, so Dad and me said goodbye to my teammates, and we headed up to the Duplex Diner. At Duplex, we settled into our booth, and I had the courage to ask Dad, "Dad, what did you think of my boyfriend?" I had prepared for pretty much all of the worst, and what I got was this. "Kota, he is so nice. All that matters to me is that he is a good person from a good family, and that he will love you for the rest of your life."